The debt ceiling deadline is nearing. Can Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate reach a compromise and come up with a new budget plan? We'll discuss political ideology entrenchment and the economic ramifications on West Michigan Week. And thank you for joining us on West Michigan Week. On our panel, as always, Carol Valet, Grand Rapids Business Journal, and Mitch Stapley, our guest chief fixed economist and income officer at Fifth Third Bank Corp. And at the Seidman College of Business, the chair, Paul Isley. Thank you so much for joining us. Did we think we'd be here sitting discussing this?
No.
I mean, it is so unbelievable it becomes laughable, and this is a serious matter.
Paul and I were discussing beforehand that there was simply no way 6 months, 9 months ago you would have thought that you could really come back for something like this. Sure, we could talk about the situation in Europe, the European debt crisis. Look at the way that's been swept off the headlines, swept off the front page in the space of a week by something that we would have never thought our political leaders would have allowed us to come to this edge of the precipice where we've got 4 days to go to make this kind of decision, and they're telling us we won't know anything until the weekend.
Right. I mean, it wasn't even until this week that people started to realize, oh, wait a minute, they ain't going to get it done.
Well, there's certainly, at least the Republicans believe that the deadline's kind of a false deadline anyway, that they can keep moving that out. I would say both of you, given your expertise and experience.
This is one of those situations where I think so far the reaction in the market has been amazingly muted. Okay, we had a 200
That surprised me as well.
It's we had a 200-point down day yesterday, and bonds were off while stocks are bouncing back up again today. You've had great earnings numbers out there. A lot of this is covering up the fact we've got some great stories out there. The economy is showing some signs of coming back, but the response has been amazingly muted so far. But when you're dealing with the fact that we are the reserve currency, the U.S. dollar is where everyone goes, okay, when they need safety in a time of global upheaval. For us to be getting closer and closer to that edge with the kind of cavalier attitude that seems to be in Washington right now is just stunning to me, just stunning. And I wonder how much longer we have before you get some kind of real sharp market shock to really focus these guys' attention.
David Beers from Standard & Poor's is in town from London, obviously this week kind of keeping an ear close to those doors. That's the rating everyone's worried about, the municipal rating system. It certainly impacts straight down to the local governments. If the federal government's credit rating is downgraded, that's an automatic downgrading for all of the rest, is it not?
Well,
that holds true.
To an extent it will be. I mean, it means you have to be that much better to maintain your higher rating. But you're still looking at what's considered to be the safest asset in the world. We're talking about defaulting on. And we're starting to talk seriously about it. That's just crazy. We made banks load up on these because they were safe. And now we're saying, no, it's not safe. That's a problem.
Yeah, I think the problem is, and this will be a continued theme, whenever you look at this, no one really knows what the final last straw is. What's the last problem that this would cause? A downgrade goes down and it hits Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It hits the agencies immediately. It hits the states and drags the states down. Then it hits large banks that are seen as having government support behind them. It hits insurance companies. Then it hits things like pre-read muni bonds, where the issuer went out and bought a portfolio of treasury bills to basically immunize that portfolio until maturity. Probably the safest investment out there. All of these get downgraded. And then you begin to think about those being used as collateral on a loan transaction, and that has to be raised.
And higher interest payments mean that you have a greater deficit on the government level and in the private sector.
I mean, right now it's got somewhere between, if they choose to default, we're talking an extra 100 to 200 billion a year.
Added to the deficit.
Added to the deficit, which means over the 10-year span that they're talking about, an additional $1 trillion added to the deficit just because of that they're doing now.
It's catastrophic, or do you have another word?
It's catastrophic. What we have to focus on here is, again, a worst-case scenario. And the problem is, the worst-case scenario would be default. What we're seeing in the marketplace is no real reaction saying that that catastrophic option would come up. It's idiotic that we've even got to this point of having this discussion.
You're polite.
I'm trying to be polite. The reality is that the market, and we're seeing it in the pricing of short treasury bills, you know, as you look at your screens, the market is not pricing the notion of a default where you would not get your money back. Now, there might be a technical default that you don't get your money for a day or two, okay, which might be painful. But think of the psychological damage that that does to the credit rating of formerly the safest investment in the world. Even if it's a day or two, it's devastating, and you would never be able to recover from that.
Most likely. It is the idea that the debt ceiling will be raised, and we're just going to kick the can down the road a little further until 2012, which is what a lot of people out there are saying right now. I mean, at some point you do have to deal with spending. There's no doubt about it.
Well, you either have, I mean, at the trajectory that we're on right now, you either have to increase your income or decrease your spending. They have to deal with that. But linking it with the debt ceiling is a political ploy, but it's economically just ludicrous.
If that were to happen, if the debt ceiling were to be revisited next year, prior to elections, same debacle, more than likely worse, does that do anything to improve a credit rating as Standard & Poor's might look at it? I would think that would be an issue as well. That would downgrade rather than
that actually hurts
help.
us. Having
Right.
The longer you make a solution for, the less problem it's going to be for our credit rating, and the better it's going to be for our economy. Right now, I just watched an interview with Alan Mulally from Ford, and he said they're already having to make adjustments in hiring and everything else as a result of what's happening right now.
Explain this idea. There's this notion out there that, well, I can balance my household budget. Why can't the government? Two completely different things.
They're two completely different things. And part of the problem that people don't understand is you reach a point in your life where you know that your income is going to go to zero, all right? And you're going to retire and you're going to live off of your savings. That's not how governments operate. Governments last indefinitely, or at least until they're taken over by somebody else.
Unless you're Greece.
Right. And as a result, you can continue to have debt because your income continues to go up, all right? But that debt has to be growing slower than your income on average, and that's not where our trajectory is right now.
So concise.
Yeah. No, I think he hits the nail on the head. The fact remains that as we think of the country growing in perpetuity out there, we simply can't have a situation where our debt's growing at 10% a year when our economy's growing at 2% a year.
Right.
I mean, now if we reverse the situation where the economy was growing at 10% and debt was growing at 2%, we wouldn't be here.
And
we
you
wouldn't
were
be
both
having this
saying
discussion.
there are certainly indications now that that's beginning to happen, that there is some recovery in the national economy. And I mean, the state of Michigan was able to get a decent bond rating yesterday as well.
Well, that's the most frustrating thing, you know, as an investor, you know, where we're, you know, dealing with the markets on an ongoing basis. I think one of the most frustrating things that we would feel at FTAM when we look at it, look at company earnings. Of the S&P that's reported so far this year for this quarter, 75% of the companies are beating estimates. You know, great news out there. You know, the S&P, even with all this volatility, is still up on the year. But we're seeing signs of the economy slowly recover. And that real lagging indicator, though, of employment growth, the one thing you'd say, boy, we got good stuff happening in terms of company earnings and signs of the housing market putting in a bottom, beginning to get there. I need to get that employment growth. What do I need to get employment growth? I need confidence.
Right.
I need the consumer to be confident to spend, so then businesses go out and say, you know, business is up enough, I'm going to go hire a couple extra people. So just when we think we're getting to the cusp of a recovery, now we have this political circus going on in Washington. People are watching this on the evening news and they're going, you know, and you want to talk about Al Mulally, you know, what's going on with Ford. You got a guy going, you know, I was thinking about buying that new truck, and with all this stuff going on, I think I'm going to wait a couple weeks.
Better wait.
I better
And-
wait.
And I'm a company, I'm thinking about expanding and hiring people. I better wait until I know what shoe drops. And
Is-
it's slowed everything down. It's going to take growth out of the third quarter right now, even if we solve the problem tomorrow.
And just thinking about mortgages and mortgage lending and how slow housing has been to come back, and that's traditionally, as I understand it, a leader in recoveries. And even as that is just starting to come back, this is certainly going to impact mortgage rates. If someone is ready to close on Tuesday, do you think there's a second choice plan that might be offered by the banks, given the situation?
I think if you look at the mortgages and conforming mortgages that you'd see through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the one thing I'd say about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we have not seen any impact in the debt markets in terms of Fannie and Freddie, because they have business models. They are making loans. They are making money. There is cash flow behind them versus what we've got with the structure of the federal government. So I would say if you're thinking about closing on the mortgage, we've seen nothing, certainly in terms of any activity in the marketplace that would suggest that if that mortgage was going to close Monday or Tuesday, there would not be funding available for it. Okay, they have borrowing lines. They have.
It wouldn't impact the interest rates then. You
Well,
don't think
I mean,
that there will be
that's-
immediate impact on interest rates?
I mean, if you default, then yeah, you're talking about 100 basis points. So I'd lock that
Yeah,
rate
lock
in
the
today.
rate in today.
In the unthinkable event of an actual default on Tuesday, you can just take the 30-year Treasury rate that right now it's say 4.75% and put 100 basis points in that. That's 5.75% like that.
Global economy. I don't want to beat this dead horse here. I mean, this whole doomsday analogy that we're looking at here. What does happen? How do the dominoes fall globally should this happen?
Well, right now the U.S. is the financial leader in the world. And we're the financial leader in the world because we're the safest, most secure, most stable place in the world to put your money. And we have a deep enough market for people all over the world to get their money in. What happens if we choose to default is we're no longer the safest place. And people are going to be searching for places to put their money, and there's not many places to put it. But it's going to drive up rates all over the place.
We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about the politics of this great debate. And we're back with West Michigan Week. We're talking about the debt ceiling and spending and how did we get here. There's a lot of politics at play here. And Boehner and Obama had been working on a plan. I know, Mitch, you said you get Tourette's when you hear those two names. But there was this grand bargain that seemed to have been in place. Spending cuts of $3 trillion over 10 years. They take a look at Medicare, Social Security benefits, and raise tax revenues of $800 billion or more. Did that sound reasonable? What's getting in the way here?
And we don't know. Okay, I mean, we don't know. All we're hearing is kind of the he said, she said part of this. The Republicans are saying that the president basically, wanted to keep ramping up taxes, never gave any real firm commitments on spending cuts. I mean, that's at least what we're hearing. The Democrats look at the Republicans and said they looked and said there will be no new taxes, and that plan couldn't work with that. The notion of why it was a great solution, it answered what the market wanted to see. It wants, right now, today, the debt ceiling raised. Okay, that's today's problem. But then in the intermediate and long term, they were credible, and I think that's the real issue here. There was a credible plan to reduce spending and also address entitlements. Because sooner or later, the question about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid has to be addressed. And unless you do that, that will finally be the trigger where the markets do have some kind of a much sharper reaction, pushing rates up, stock prices down. But that notion of entitlement reform and trying to keep kicking that can down the road, that's not going to work.
But you can't rush into that and try to come up with something in 72 hours. It just,
Well, all of these plans are saying we're going to cut, but not saying what those cuts are. They're putting in, we're going to have growth capped, or we're going to cut spending, but they haven't said I'm going to cut $100 billion from this and $300 billion from that. That's the next year.
Should this have been a two-part question? I know that the spending levels have to be addressed to continue with a favorable credit rating, but should it have been in two parts, or could it be in two parts?
Well, from an economic standpoint, yes. From a political standpoint, this was a big club to try and move in the direction you wanted to see the U.S. policy go, and both sides have decided to use that club.
I think on National Public Radio this morning we were hearing that the credit rating for the state of Maryland currently being evaluated is on its way down based on a plan to reduce spending and the number of layoffs in the public sector, National Cancer Institute, Science Institute, et cetera.
Yeah, you've actually got 5 states that are AAA rated right now, that because of their ties into the federal government, any kind of cutback in federal spending is going to be reflected in a lower credit rating for those states. So this is that idea that ripple effect going all the way through the economy, and the unintended consequences. So I think that's the frustrating part right now, that the further we kick the can down the road, the idea that these surprises, if you will, okay, these states being downgraded, get bigger and more widespread in the economy.
Do you think this could have been then a two-part question?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and what was neat about the grand bargain thought process was if you look at how the deficit has increased over the last 10 years, the debt has increased over the last 10 years above what the CBO originally projected, the ratio of increase in revenues and decrease in spending is about what it should have been given the proportion of the decrease in revenues and increase in spending caused to the deficit. In other words, we have about $11 trillion more debt than we thought we would when we started the year 2000. And about 2 to 3 trillion of that is from the tax piece, where we don't have enough revenues. And the other 7 trillion, I keep wanting to say billion, we're talking big numbers.
Wish.
Yeah.
It's wishful thinking.
is from spending increases. And so the ratio was right. So that was interesting.
and much of this comes down to revenue generation. I mean, the Republicans, no taxes. I think for the Democrats, they're having an issue with the entitlements. So both sides need to give something.
Yep.
And it's a hard pill to swallow at this point because everybody is so devoted to the party. It seems like party first, country second right now. At some point, something has to give. The idea of generating revenue. I know, Mitch, you and I talked about that this morning on the phone. Something has to give there.
And this is one of the things. I will, put my credentials out as a pretty conservative guy. When you're a bond investor, forget the flash of the stock market. I want to get my money back and a little interest. We are the conservative investors. Okay, we'll take a conservative approach to everything else, politics. But when we look at the situation today and we look at the revenue question, that's clearly one of the pieces of this puzzle. We need to, look at where our business tax is right now relative to the rest of the world and say, wow, we're at 35%. That's too high. Well, the truth of the matter is it might be 35%, but nobody's paying 35%. So if you want to lower that tax rate down, like the Republicans talk about, fine. But let's rationalize the process to make sure everybody's paying their portion of the taxes, whether you be an individual, whether you be a corporation. We have the example where multinational corporations can have offshore revenue, okay, and their army of tax attorneys and accountants making sure that revenue and the taxes stay overseas and is not repatriated back in the United States. So you get a case where you've got a company like GE, okay, with $13 billion in revenue paying zero in taxes, okay? We can't support the economy and the growth of the economy and basically have that kind of a tax base. It's too narrow right now, and the idea that we're just going to raise the taxes on the wealthy to fix this problem doesn't work. We need to broaden the base let's get rid of a lot of these deductions, okay? And that's part of the revenue side. But then spending has to come down too. Right now, the federal government's spending 25% of GDP. Long-term average goes between 18 and 19%, okay? We're spending too much at the federal level. That has to come down.
And the problem with that is in the long term, that does mean Social Security, it does mean Medicare and Medicaid. And we have to be, those have to be on the table. And the sooner we put them on the table, the smaller the cuts are going to have to be.
Does defense get put on the table?
Oh, certainly.
Everything.
Certainly.
And see, that's where the notion that we have any discussion at all, Patrick, where we're going and we say, well, okay, we're going to discuss everything but right there, but that. The notion of shared sacrifice is the one where both parties have to come together and say everybody is going to hate this thing. Everybody is going to find this to be, at some level, from some point of view, unpalatable.
Rick Snyder. This was his idea too. What would I know there's been a lot of frustration, and particularly for both of you because you're immersed in these issues. And so I guess I want to know what you would say to either leader, or whether this is just a complete fallacy that there is leadership in Washington.
Don't get them started.
I really, what would you say,
Well,
each of you,
I'm questioning whether the leadership
without
is
breaking
there.
into Tourette's?
Yeah, I'm questioning whether the leadership is there. They should have been able to get things together and be able to explain the case not only to the representatives but to the American people why it's important to get this done. Leaders can do that, and I'm questioning why we have a sizable chunk of the Americans who in polls don't seem to understand what the problem is. You know, a leader would be able to get us there.
Yeah, and you hate to keep going back to this notion of whatever happened to the days of, but this would be a great example where you look at, okay, whatever happened to the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill? I mean, that was a very liberal Boston Democrat, and then Ronald Reagan as a leader, but there was some notion that they would come together and they would understand that issues had to be solved and that you couldn't be so polarized that you couldn't even be in the same room discussing the issue. The same notion with, with Gerald Ford. And I mean, it strikes close to home because it's here in West Michigan, but again, that was a conservative Republican, and he would talk with the other side of the aisle, and they would basically say, for the common good, we're going to come together and fix something. And that would be my question back to the two leaders. Whatever happened to the notion of you guys sitting down with the notion of the common good to try and come up with an answer and fix something?
I guess I would agree with you in some way, Mitch, in that if you break something, there's no reason to want to lead it in 2012 or 13 or 14. If it's that broken. But I guess my other question to you then is, how would you have divided this into two questions, and what would your advice be going forward? Come out with a plan? I mean, that's what everybody's saying, but what would that entail or include?
I would say from the market's perspective, okay, as a professional investor, I would look and say, first off, raise a debt limit. Let's just take that one off
the table.
But then the second thing, we have to acknowledge the current course we're on right now is unsustainable, okay? So I've got to raise some taxes, okay? I've got to lower spending, and I have to address the notion of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The one number that's so compelling here, if I look at the growth in those three programs, and I assume that I'm going to take in my normal level of taxes at the federal level, about 18% of GDP. So if the tax level stays the same, in 2050, those three programs will take every dime that the government takes in taxes. So we can see it coming, okay? But as a participant, I'd say, okay, take the debt ceiling, address that, but then let's get some meaningful, let's acknowledge we can't keep going down the path we're going down right here. And no one is going to like the fact that there's going to be shared sacrifice. But let's make sure it's shared sacrifice, not trying to put it all off on one group, not off on the other. But if it's shared sacrifice, this country in the past has shown we've got a history of coming together on something like this, but you have to be led.
Millennials in polls are saying there's no more a two-party system. Everyone is that fed up. Do you think that in your circles you're seeing that extend to? Are you both becoming libertarians next week? Or
Well, you're certainly seeing a stratification within both parties, which is in essence fragmenting the parties. So yeah, I think we're already getting there.
Yeah, I mean, you will sit there and ask, among, other market participants, as you look at this and you're trying to say, okay, what's the financial course that we're setting here? And think about it, you're setting it for our children too, and what kind of legacy we're going to be leaving our children. And there's been the discussion of, whatever happened to a fiscally conservative, socially moderate leader out there that you could turn to, and we've lost that. And so do we give rise to a third-party candidate that really comes in and fills that niche, and do people coalesce behind that?
All right. We'll have to end the discussion there. Carol Valade,
Thank you, Patrick.
Mitch Stapley, and Paul Isley. Thank you all so much for joining us. And one final word, we're not making fun of Tourette's or anybody who has Tourette's or anybody who knows somebody with Tourette's. So our apology, I think we're just talking about how frustrating this has become over time. So from all of us here, we'll see you next week on West Michigan Week.